This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
Let's start with talking a little bit about your story and how you got into the mission of improving campus safety, how this all started for you and where you are now with it.
Sure. So I started about 27 years ago now, in higher education. So not what I planned on doing. I went to school for criminal justice. Everybody wanted to be a street cop, but right out of college, I had an offer to go to work for Springfield College. And they put me through police academy, and I actually just fell in love with campus policing. I realized that campus policing was really sort of at the cusp of a new generation. It was the first time that that policing was starting to come into its own on a college campus. It wasn't just security guards, doing their own thing. And I realized 99% of the people I deal with were actually good kids, rather than 99% of the people I would deal with as a regular street patrol officer wouldn't be the same. So that really got me into campus policing. I realized very quickly that there was a lot of ground that needed to be made up in campus policing with technology. Not only the policies and procedures, but how to get the technology out, how to fund that technology, and then how to manage it. And so rather than becoming like a detective or an investigator or have any specialty like that, I really started to work on Clery Act compliance and the technology around getting colleges and universities to where they needed to be to make colleges and campuses safer, not just one officer at a time, but really deploying technology to be a force multiplier. And that's sort of my sweet spot. I became a deputy chief fairly young. I became a deputy chief at 26. I had my first police department as the chief of police at Bucknell University at 29. And I did that for about 7 years. And during that time, I started consulting and training people around the country for Clery compliance and Clery Act safety. But what I realized at one point around 2012 was I needed to try to get out and bring the gospel of school safety and technology to all campuses, not just Bucknell where I was working at the time.
So tell me a little bit about how the experience as a campus safety chief and as somebody with a background in law enforcement, how has that influenced or impacted your work at Genetec and your work with other technology-based startups and companies to help improve campus safety?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think what I bring to any of the roles that I try to do for technology companies is everybody looks at colleges maybe as a one-trick pony, right? They want cameras or they want access control. But what they don't realize is that there's so much more than just the public safety that makes a college campus safe. Whether it's, yes, obviously a big part of that is access control to make sure that we have these, what we call concentric circles. So we have building security, we have license plate readers out on the campus to know who's coming in, which is especially important in the this gig economy with food delivery and Ubers and Lyfts all over the place. But what I bring to them and try to educate the entire organization is you actually have a ton more there. You have enterprise risk management and how can we use all of the information that we're gathering from our solutions, not only to provide direct safety, but to provide the information and data to a higher level, to the enterprise risk management level, to the dean of students, to events management, to allow the campus to operate not only safer, but be more compliant, and transparency and accountability. I can't stress those enough, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that we've had a sea change in the last 3-4 years in the expectations and requirements of policing. Campus police is not exempt from that at all. Now, I do think campus policing may have started at a higher level just because of our level of interaction and accountability with our resident population and how we interact with them on a regular basis. But we have a necessity now to use these technologies to provide full transparency. So a student advisory board or a public safety oversight group needs to be able to come in and see, hey, what cameras are we looking at? Are they being used appropriately? What are the standards and operating procedures that you're bound to, and are you following in that? And what's the accountability that we see there? Can we hold you accountable to that if you're not? And so it provides a very wide basis for how we can provide that safety and security and increased data usage to those colleges and universities.
Yeah. Now, as a student, I hear a lot of sentiments from my peers about their skepticism in law enforcement.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, how do you understand the community aspect of this? How can we bolster the relationship between the student and the campus safety officer so that we can kind of come to a common ground and realize that we're all working here to achieve one common goal, and that is to make sure that nobody gets hurt and to keep everybody safe?
You know, the one thing that I think we've gotten away from too much in law enforcement across the board is the idea of community policing. It was really big in the 80s. It was something we put a lot of stake into. And quite frankly, that's how policing started, right? If you look at Robert Peel and what he was doing in Europe, and then the way the big cities were handled, New York and Boston at the turn of the century here in the United States, you couldn't work in a place unless you lived there. You couldn't come in. And the reason for that was you needed to know your neighbors. Your neighbors needed to trust you, and you had to have accountability where you worked. And I think the same is for these college campuses. I think the idea of having the officers be students on campus or to engage in non-police related activities, whether it is adopt a dorm or the dorm adopts a cop, or going to events on campus, or being that, I think those are integral parts of your service as a police officer. Not always in the uniform, not always doing the enforcement, but to see the students, the faculty, and the staff as a population that are part of your family. And if we could do that, if we can get that out there, I think it endears them better. And I think it creates a level of trust with students, faculty, and staff that otherwise isn't there, because you're seen as that sheepdog, right? You're always somewhere off to the side until you're needed for a critical incident.
Yeah.
And that's really not what we want to do. I know there's a lot of consternation about officers being in residence halls because they think they're only there for enforcement or whatever the case is. But I feel like if you get used to officers being in your residence hall and having day-to-day conversations with them, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Maybe not in full police uniform, but maybe a dressed down look. I think that allows you to have a level of discussion with them that really starts to change the way that you guys work together. There's a level of trust on both sides. And rather than the officer immediately arresting somebody or taking enforcement action when they see a violation, I think it becomes more of a, hey, listen, do the right thing. Put it out or go, pour it out or whatever the case is. And it becomes an overall better campus. It becomes a better place to live, work, and play.
I could not agree more. And I think that was perfectly said. So we've talked about the community-based aspect. We've talked about the technology-based aspect. If you had to identify the single biggest problem facing colleges and universities and campuses in public safety, what would you say that is?
Recruitment right now. Recruitment across the board. Recruitment and retention, actually. So that's they go hand in hand. So recruitment and retention is a big problem in college campuses right now, in law enforcement in general. We've seen a 20 or 30% decline in applications for jobs. I could tell you I had a master's degree trying to get my first chief's job, and I lost out to someone who had a double master's degree. It's insane, wow. Right? You can't imagine going up against somebody who has multiple certificates like that for that sort of leadership in law enforcement. But even at a basic level, it was hard to get hired as a police officer back in the 90s and 2000s. Now, police departments can't recruit. I think the biggest, for college campuses in particular, I think one of the biggest things is to have the diversity match what the college campus diversity is. So, for instance, my last school, Bucknell University, right? It's an amazing school, well-diverse population, but because I live in a very monolithic society around here, it's hard to recruit people, ethnic minorities or other groups that we want to bring in to active police work. We cannot get them in this area. So that's a huge issue. And the other piece is the salary equivalency to a municipal police department. So on a college campus, even though you're expecting them to do more because they need to be police, they need to be EMS, they need to have some basic fire experience, they're doing traffic enforcement, they're doing building lockups, they need to know technology. So they have to have a much wider and broader set of skills. They need to be a jack of all trades. We're not attracting them because we're losing them on salary to municipal police departments. Mm-hmm. And in the last 3 or 4 years, what we've seen is because of this consolidation and loss of revenue for colleges and universities, benefits like education for officers and their family, and all faculty and staff and their families, are not what it was when I was first started out. When I first started out, I got my master's for free. Because I worked on that college campus. My kids could have gone to school for free. And now it's definitely not at that level. And so I think one of the things we need to do is revisit how are we incentivizing that recruitment? And then how do we keep them once they're here? Are they given the training that they need in diversity? Are they given the training that they need on de-escalation to make sure that when they come up into these incidents, that they deal with them in a respectful way, that the community of the college campus is accepting of, rather than just a straight enforcement action?
So let's talk a little bit about Genetec, what it is, and how Genetec is working to improve the problems that we have identified so far. How is that company making a difference? So
Genetec is one of the technology leaders, a global technology leader in a number of areas. They started about 25 years ago as the first IP video management company in the world. And so that's our bread and butter, right? So video cameras, you can imagine the thousands and thousands of locations that use us for video. And then they added on access control, and then license plate readers, and all of those pieces are now layered on with intelligence and analytics and all of those other pieces to help as force multipliers and help create data, usable data and information for colleges, universities, public sector, and enterprise as well. So let's take the three stools, right? So access control, video, and license plate readers. If we start with video, you look at any college campus in the United States. There's not one college campus that I visited as a consultant or as a technologist that doesn't have video cameras. Video cameras are great, but if you look at a large institution where they have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 cameras, it's unmanageable. There's not a human that could sit there and do it. There's not 30 humans that could sit there and look at that. And so what Genetec did was work with the camera manufacturers and internally to create analytics, things that call your attention to it. And so the cameras become automated. So we could put, you imagine like a fence line with cameras on it. Rather than having someone look at that fence line all the time, you put video analytics on it. So if someone tries to jump the fence, it'll notify the dispatcher or the person looking at the camera. It'll bring that video up, and you can interact with it at that point in time. So it takes the work out of the constant looking at those cameras, right? And we can do other things to provide safety and security for that campus. The second part to that is access control. And so we've taken those sort of concentric circles of cameras that just sort of look around the campus to the actual buildings itself. And so now we're providing access control on the main doors for those buildings. So we're making sure that only the people that are supposed to be in that building or that have permission to be on that campus or in that location have access to that building. And so it minimizes the people from outside that don't have access, that come in for nefarious reasons, to have access to those areas, whether it's a residence hall, an academic building, or even like an athletic location. All of those places at this point have access control on them in one way, shape, or form. And then if we push those concentric circles out even farther, we use the license plate readers. And so now we can see who's coming and going on our campus, not really in real time if we don't want to, but after the fact. If there's an accident or a fight or graffiti or damage to something, we can go back and look at that film and say, this vehicle's not registered to campus. It's not supposed to be on campus. And oh, by the way, it looks like this person has a problem or has a criminal record or something to that extent. We could also use it for people that are not allowed on campus anymore. So you have a parent that's estranged, or a domestic relationship, whether it's a student or faculty staff domestic relationship, and someone's driving onto campus. As soon as it hits that license plate reader, it'll pop up a notification. So the officers are notified that a vehicle that's not supposed to be on campus is now on campus. We don't have to wait for them to do something bad or try to get in a building. We are able to stop or interdict that vehicle before it gets to its final destination, which becomes a huge precursor for cutting criminal behavior off before it even happens. So when you start to put all of those things together, we have these concentric circles, and we create a blanket around that college, university, or city, or K-12 that allows us to use the technology as a force multiplier and as the ability to create a preventive barrier around that school.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a great venture.
It is. It's really interesting. And then there's new stuff. There's analytics that go on top of that. There's intelligence solutions where you can now overlay SOPs. So if someone's having a heart attack or if someone's having an alcohol or drug overdose, it'll actually walk them through it in real time on how they should react and what they need to do. How to lock down a building, how to create, response to fire. All of those things can be done ahead of time, so that dispatcher or that officer can be concentrating on mitigating that situation as quickly as possible.
Now, one of the coolest things that I discovered about you was that you pitched a company on Shark Tank, season 6, I believe. It was called Emergency, and it was a business that allowed people to live stream their emergency when they were in a point of conflict. You have since pivoted since then now to Genetec. So I would love to hear a little bit about what that was like, what that transition was like.
So it was a really interesting company. So it was, right? You took your phone and you tapped it and you upload audio, video, GPS, real time, anywhere in the world to a back-end monitoring center. We started with college campuses and corporate campuses because they had the campus police or corporate security always ready to go. We were on Shark Tank. We did really well. We got a number of investors out of it. But at the end of the day, we tried to create a product that was feature rich, and we wanted everything in that product. And while we had good advocates and good people on board, a couple other companies were out there that did MVP, right? A minimum viable product. They did just what they needed to do. They had a couple of different approaches where they had students monitoring each other rather than having to pay for a college to monitor them. And so they're the ones that ended up taking off. The technology was used in a couple of other startups. It's actually being used in one that I'm consulting on now called Side Piece by a woman named Kathleen Gallagher, Safety Chick, which should be coming to market in the next year or so. So all of those things help you. And so what you realize is, yes, that might not have worked, but at the end of the day, there's 5 or 6 companies out there today that we were the bleeding edge technology. In 2012, we were the first company to be on the market to provide streaming video to a back-end monitoring center.
Wow. Well, that's all so exciting, and it's an amazing company. And yeah, the work you're doing is great. And I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to do this interview with us, and thank you for just designating your time and your life to advancing campus safety. I really do appreciate it.
Michael, listen, I think what we're doing here is necessity. I want to get back to zero more than anybody. It breaks my heart every time I see this. My wife is 3rd generation Virginia Tech. I've spent my life on college campuses, and anything we can do to get back to where we need to be with preventative solutions like gun detection before they get there is what we need to do. We need to get back to zero to a safe and secure learning environment for our children and for our student, our faculty and staff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. Thank you so much.
Michael, thank you very much. You have a great night.